Berg. She is a recently passed 4-H Youth Development Extension agent out of Crowers County, and we just roped her back into it because we love her so much. And she has had years of experience raising, exhibiting, and managing market goat shows, and she's currently working for Legacy Livestock Imaging. So thank you for being here, Megan.
Thanks, Kenzie. Yes, as Kenzie said, I'm still repping my 4-H here. As Kenzie said, I grew up showing and raising market goats and breeding goats. I caught my very first market goat when I was in the 5th grade, and my herd started from 7 head of wethers and 1 doe, and at its peak in my high school career, it grew to over 80 head. My parents still run the operation. They still have the goats, but we're back down around 30 head now. And my mom takes the does. We're much more on the breeding side of thing now. So my mom takes the does and shows them all over the country. But for those of you that were not here last week we went over a little bit of our selection. This time of year is when, ideally, had all of the COVID thing not come up, this is when you guys would be at sales, looking at animals, picking out your projects for this year. Typically, goats do better as buddies. So it's better to have at least 2 of them and not leave a single by themselves. They just don't do very well. They're very social creatures. But we talked about some selection. We talked about what a judge looks for, those kind of things. This week, we are going to talk about handling and grooming. And I don't know how many of you heard me before we started. This is liable to be a little bit shorter presentation, but I think it will foster some really good questions. So without further ado, why does my computer do this every time? Okay, so when we start in the spring, you do not want to start breaking your goats to lead the week before fair, kiddos. It's just not going to go well. There's going to be lots of screaming. It's not worth your time. So it's a good idea to start doing that in the spring. Before you guys ever decide to put any sort of halter or lead on them, just sit in the pen with them and let them get used to you. You get used to them. Goats are very friendly creatures, and they love treats. I taught a lot of mine to eat out of my hand as a kid. So I would just sit in the pen for hours with feed in my hand so that they would come up and be my buddy. I know some of you kiddos like to buy the bottle babies. Those are great for the most part, but bottle babies tend to get lazy on you. They make really, really good showmanship wethers, but they typically don't make very good show market wethers just because they get lazy. They don't want to try. They just want to be your buddy and chew on you the whole time. So once we've gotten our goats used to us, the next thing is to start working with them. And the first thing we want to do, it's up to you guys. We started out with just collars like a dog and leads to get them to lead. We found over the years, however, that a halter works much better because it teaches them to keep their heads up versus a collar where you're just dragging them. And then we eventually transition them, once we get them kind of used to a halter and used to the pressure on their face and the pressure under their chin, then we'll put a chain on them. They don't like that chain or the prong collar. Some people we use the prong collars on our does. It just helps our does show a little bit better. But with that being said, and like Kenzie said, if we have people joining from other states, it's dependent on the show that you're going to. County fairs have different rules than state fairs, different rules than majors. So make sure you check the rule book for what you can use. I know in past years, it's been a big deal. State fair wouldn't let anybody use what's called a Hummel halter, which is just it's a kind of a synthetic leather type stuff, and then a chain underneath. And they wouldn't let anybody use the prong collars. That has since changed, but if you decide to go on to Denver still will not allow that. So check your rules, because the worst thing you can do is train something all summer long on a prong collar and get to a show and not be able to use it and have to go back to a flat chain, and the goat's not like, what are you doing to me? So we typically start with we like the rope halters, not the nylon calf halters, the actual rope halter. We get them from Weaver just because we like them, because they have a hook on the end of them, so you can hook them back to the fence. The calf halters are great, but they will burn your hands a lot more. If something gets away from you, they'll pull through and they'll hurt the pads of your hands. But we start them on a rope halter. We get them used to the leading. Last week we talked a little bit about exercise. And when I was a kid, we ran them down the road. And so we would lead them all the way down to the stop sign. It was about a mile. We'd lead them all the way down to the stop sign. That was our walking practice for the day. And then we would run them back, take them off their halters, and we would chase them back. It was great fun. Dogs enjoyed it. Kids enjoyed it. It was fantastic. Then at the time when I was showing, we just transitioned to a flat chain because we didn't start using prong collars until I was out of high school. That wasn't really an industry thing. We just transitioned to a flat chain, did a lot more work at home in an enclosed area so we could get them used to that chain. That way they weren't fighting you day of show. However, I will tell you guys, with that being said, a goat will choke themselves out faster on a flat chain because it doesn't hurt. It just slowly kind of chokes them. Whereas a prong collar, they will get off of it because it hurts. So just something to consider. Personal preference doesn't make, neither of them are inhumane in any degree. It just depends on what you want to show with and what your show will allow you to show with. All right. So like I said, when we show our animals, we want their heads up. Sorry, I'm demonstrating. We want their heads up. We want that chain in their jawline. If you don't leave it in their jawline, they get this little kind of fat pocket here, and it doesn't look very pretty. Especially if you guys ever start showing the breeding stock, we want long, elegant necks. And if they've got a waddle, that's not very elegant. We also want it to be able to show off the tie of the head. So you guys that were here last week, we talked about how their neck ties into their shoulder. So if their necks are up and looking pretty, you're going to be able to see how much better they tie in, or a judge will be able to. The best thing, especially showmanship was my jam when I was a kid. That was my favorite part of the show. You want your partner, which is your goat, you want your partner to walk easily beside you. You don't want them to be dragging behind you, and you don't want them to be trying to run away from you. So one thing that I learned over time, instead of dragging them, I would stay back by their shoulders and I would kind of push them forward in front of me. And as long as I was by their shoulders, they were more willing to walk with me, opposed to freaking out and by being drugged or trying to run away from me. When you're in your class, as soon as you guys stop, you need to set up. Don't be lollygagging, looking for mom or doing whatever. You need to make sure you're stopped and you're set up square. You want your front legs straight down, and you want your back legs. Now, it's going to depend on the animal, but you want your back legs set back just a little bit. That way, when you go into your brace, they're ready to go. Okay? Whoops, did it again. Okay, whoops. So when your judge is in a show ring, I'm a big stickler on showmanship. Like I said, it was my favorite. You don't follow the person in front of you. But follow them, obviously, but don't follow what they do. If they go right up to the fence and are right on the fence to where a judge can't walk down that fence and be able to look at them, don't do that. Pull off about a goat length away from the fence. That way your judge can actually get down that fence and look at them. But you want that animal set square, and you want that judge to be able to see the chest floor and the bone on the front end of the animal. Now bracing is an industry standard. Very, very few people don't not brace anymore. When I first started out, bracing was not a thing. It was very much in the lamb. It is leaked over from the lamb industry. When I was a kid, we had to get creative about bracing. It was not common practice. Now it's very, very common practice. So I'm going to talk to you, and it's hard to do over a video, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bracing and why we do it. So the idea behind bracing is we want those animals to tense up, just like you guys flexing your muscles. You can see, I mean, it's kind of there. You can see that it tenses up versus if I just held my hand up, it's kind of squishy. Okay. So we want those animals to tense their muscles across their back and through their hindquarters. The bracing can be accomplished in a couple of different ways. The most common practice one is to brace similar to how the lamb kids brace. So you would put your leg in front of an animal and push on them, and they would push back, is the idea. Sometimes I've had ones that just won't, and I've had to stick my fingers there's a V underneath their jaw, and I've had to stick my fingers in that V and kind of push to get them to brace. But this is something that you can't start the day before fair. You have to work at this all summer long. And with this, you also have to exercise these animals. Whether it's you run them down the road like I did as a kid. Some people have treadmills. Some people run them on a track with a dog. There's lots of different ways to exercise them. Some people, I talked about last week, we built an A-frame in our pen to where our feed was on one side and our water was on another, so that they were forced to go over that A-frame to get to one or the other. And that was some exercise for them. Plus they like laying on top of it because goats are weird like that. But bracing, depending on the amount of time you're in a class, bracing can be a leg workout. So it's good for you guys to practice all summer long, so that when you get to State Fair or you get to Denver or you get to Kansas City, some of those bigger shows, you're ready to stand in a class for 20 or 30 minutes. So when we started really bracing really became a thing when I was a junior in high school. So about 2011 is when it really started to become common practice. We started bracing them flat on the ground first, more for us than for them. So we could figure out our feet. We could figure out how best to stand. Some people stand with a super wide base, like a lamb kid. They're not as tall as lambs, so it's a lot harder to do the real splayed out, but some people can get away with it. I typically stood with my angles are hard on this. I typically stood with my feet in a 90 degree and let them push on the inner part of my thigh and my knee. But that's all something you guys start out on the ground and figure your own feet out, and then eventually you can take them to some sort of platform. We used a hay bale or the end of the trailer. People have built actual just wood platforms with a piece of AstroTurf over the top of it. And the idea is, don't make it a super, super tall platform. Don't make it anything that can hurt you or hurt the goat. But the idea is you push them to the edge and they're going to push back because they don't want to fall off the edge. And you do that for a little bit, and then you go on a walk. And then you do it for a little bit, and then you go on a walk. And eventually they'll figure it out to where they're doing it. Every time you stick your knee in them, they're going to brace. I hope that makes some sort of sense on a video. All right. So grooming basics. Grooming is an important part of just taking care of your animals. Just like you brush your hair every day and brush your teeth, you want to be able to take care of your animals in the same way. One thing, it will allow you to socialize with your animal, get your animal used to touching them, get your animal used to a brush, get them used to, when we washed them, we used a rubber horse thingy, and it scrubbed them real well. get them used to that kind of thing. The other part of this process, get them used to your clippers. Clippers can be loud and they can be scary depending on what kind you have. We started out with a set of lamb shears and they were super loud. So the goats didn't like them because of how loud they were. And we ended up spending a lot of our time cutting our goats or messing up their clipper jobs because they weren't really used to them. This also allows us to check our animals for any sort of ailments, whether it be goats. Sometimes we'll get little parasites, fleas, ticks, mites, that kind of thing, because they like to rub on the hay, and then all those little creatures find their way into their hair. We also have found just sores. I don't know how many animals we've clipped underneath their chest, and there's been a sore from them getting up and down off the ground, rubbing on the fence or whatever. So that's something that it allows you to find those sort of things. I don't know if anybody's familiar with a CL. CLs are these nasty, they look like pimples. They're these nasty pockets of pus that animals will typically get under their ear in their jawline. Or sometimes they get them where their lymph nodes are. So under their ear, in their jawline. Sometimes we've had ones get them down on their chest, or in their flank. So clipping has given us the ability to be able to discover those. You can't show an animal when they have one of those. So discover those, get those taken care of, and hopefully they get healed up before the show. So with that, you should clip your animals often. Even if you're not someone to jackpot all summer long or go to shows all summer long, that's okay. Still clip your animals. Goats even though they came from Africa, we've kind of bred the heat tolerance out of them a little bit. So go ahead and clip them. When you feel like, kind of like a flower, when you feel like it's not going to frost anymore, go ahead and clip them. They will be much more comfortable. They're going to eat better. There's less likely chance of them coming down with some sort of disease without all of that hair, because they're not able to regulate their body temperature as well in the summertime. You also want to try to keep their hooves trimmed down. My family were really bad specifically about our bucks, just because they're big and they're wiggly and they stink and they're hard to trim their hooves. But you guys and these market wethers, they should be on a stand every day, for one thing or another. That's the other thing I forgot to talk about. Make sure you make your animals stand for a period of time during the day. We bought a multi-animal head catch, and made them stand for 20 or 30 minutes a day. While we were doing our other chores, we'd come back in and check on them, make sure nobody was hung up or anything. But those animals have to stand for a significant amount of time in a class. And if they're not used to that, they're not going to perform at fair. So we used to make them stand. We still tie our show does up and make them stand, especially our babies, more as a attitude management tool than anything. But that's an important thing. So you can always trim hooves, brush them off, whatever, while they're on a stand or in a catch or even just tied to the fence. That's an important thing to do. Kenzie, do we have any questions? I keep seeing the chat pop up. Do we have some questions?
Yep, we've got some talkative kids, but we do have a couple questions here.
Okay.
So one of them, I'll start with kind of the first one, is they've got, how do you handle a goat that keeps picking its leg up when you're clipping and brushing their legs and they just won't stop?
Okay. Are we picking a front leg well, if we're picking a front leg, goats are very, very fun creatures, but sometimes they have an attitude. They're kind of like a cat. If they keep picking their front leg up, the best thing that we've done, other than yell at them to stop, the best thing that we have done is just had somebody hold that front leg down while you're trying to brush and clip as best you can. If it's a back leg, you can hold it up kind of like you would a horse, kind of tuck it up there, get it clipped, do whatever, and then put it back down. The other thing, when we get to the hoof trimming, somebody remind me, and I'll talk about a trick. that we learned how to be able to get those back hooves trimmed by yourself.
Great. The next one is, what are the best clippers to clip with?
Okay, so when we do our weathers, I believe they're an Oster set of clippers. You can pick them up at most feed stores, or you can pick them up online. I believe we bought ours secondhand, but they're a premier Oster clipper, I think is what they are. We use a cover coat blade when we clip 4 to 5 days before the show, maybe as little as 3. If we clip further than that, in the summertime when I was a kid, we had 2 shows right back to back. It was our pre-fair, if you will, and then our actual county fair. So when we would clip with a fine blade. So it clipped them down really, really short. And then typically we could get away with not having to clip them again for fair, because we went from one show right into the other and didn't really have much layover. So Osters, we use A5 clippers for, my mom prefers the A5s for touch-ups. I like, what brand are they? All the cattle guys use them. They're little clippers. They're smaller. You can get all kinds of different blades for them, but they're more for touch-ups. They're not for, they're green. What are they? I can't remember. But they're more for touch-ups. I would suggest some sort of clipper that can do a cover coat blade is your best option for a body clip. And we'll get to that a little bit further.
All right. There's some questions coming in. There's a couple about the age and the weight of the goat. And you guys, this depends on which show and and when your county fairs are. Every county fair, every show might be different. But Megan, in general, can you tell us what in general we're looking for is that market weight on goats and the typical age that those goats hit at that weight?
Typically, market animals are under a year of age. At a year of age, market animals, well, any animal, any market goat will lose what's called their milk teeth. So it's kind of like you guys losing your baby teeth. So once those animals lose their milk teeth, they become a mature animal. There used to be teeth rules. I think State Fair's gotten rid of it, and I believe Denver. I don't know about any of the other majors, and it depends on your state, but a lot of the teeth rules are going away just because it's not effective for a vet to come and have to mouth everything and change gloves every time to prevent spread of disease and that kind of thing. So typically your animals are under a year of age. It's pretty obvious when they're over a year of age, they really just start not looking real great. You want industry standard, you want those animals to finish somewhere between 80 and 90 pounds. That's when they're the best. That's when their meat's the best. But with that being said, it depends on your frame size. If you've got the grand champion goat at State Fair this year, he was big. He weighed I think he weighed 95, maybe 100 pounds, but he was a large framed animal, so it fit him well. If you put 90 pounds on a little tiny animal, it's not going to fit them very well. So it's all dependent on frame size. Last week we talked about animals of all kinds will put on their finish front to back, top to bottom. So you can see, if you pay attention and you get to watching animals enough, you can see when that animal, if an animal has his finish all the way to his back hip, but he's not ready on his back hip, he's not done yet, if that makes sense. So ideally your target, industry target, most buyers want them at 80 or 90 pounds. But sometimes you can get away with them being a little bit smaller. Sometimes you can get away with them being a little bit bigger. But the other thing is, you have to remember the show ring is not the same as production side. The production side of things is looking for something totally different than a show ring is, but 80 to 90 pounds is a good medium, top end of your medium weights. to low end of your heavyweights. Okay. But Kenzie's right. It depends on your fair, depends on the show, depends on the time of year.
All right, Megan. So I'm going to have Cadence has a question for you on fitting and clipping that I'm going to let her unmute herself and ask. And then I think you can carry on and we'll compile a few more as they come in. So Cadence, you can go ahead and unmute.
So, last year at fair, there was a kid who said you don't need to groom your does. Would you recommend actually going and grooming them, or what would you go about doing that?
Yes, I would go ahead and groom them. You always want to present your animals and yourself in the best way possible for a judge. So you want your animals to be clean. You want them to be clipped nicely, even if they're not in the doe side of thing. We're starting to get to the point where we're fitting them more like cattle. And even if you don't go to that extreme, still clip their underlines so a judge can see their teats and a judge can see how clean they are in their underline clip between their chest, because you want to see that chest floor. Make sure their tail's nice and cleaned up. You don't want all that long, icky hair. Does have a tendency to pee on their tail, and so it just makes it gross. So you want to clip all of that off and make sure that they're clean, they've been brushed, all of that kind of thing. It's always a good idea to make sure your animal is fit to the best ability that you have. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on. All right. So tools in your show box. So, sorry, apparently I'm thirsty today. In your show box, show boxes come in all shapes, sizes, kinds. We started out with a little Stanley toolbox. That's what we started out with. My mom just recently sold our cattle box, which is what we kept all of our stuff in. We were goat people with a cattle box. Yes, I know. But that's what we wanted. That's what my brother and I worked our entire show careers, to have everything in one box, because we grew up and we had 40,000 boxes and, oh, don't forget the blower out of the trailer and all of that kind of thing. So show boxes come in all shapes and sizes. The big cattle box or even the smaller lamb and goat boxes are great. The hog boxes that hang on the fence are great. It just depends on what you want to do and what you feel like is a necessary tool for you. But we keep all kinds of different brushes in our box. Last week I talked a little bit about where I started out as a horse kid. So my horse tendencies bleed over a little bit. We usually keep a soft bristle brush in the box. I talked about that scrubby thingy that came from the horse world. We keep that with our wash stuff, just because, especially in the does, it helps really work into that hair. We keep, what else? Trying to think out of our box. Oh, for the does, we keep Scotch combs. And Weaver has a really cool comb that's a shedding comb. You market specific kids, you don't need either of those. If you're a doe kid, you might need it, you might not. It's up to you. A lot of the doe side of things has started carrying Scotch combs in our back pockets because I guess we want to be like the cattle industry. But we use them to make sure that hair's nice and pretty. As far as we also keep towels, any kind of towels, moms, dads, if you guys have old dish towels, old washcloths, that kind of thing, they come in handy for all kinds of things. We keep our clippers and our clipper blades. Like I said, we have 3 different sets of clippers. We have the big Oster set that we use for body clipping. We also, when we clip our does for a show, we'll clip their bellies with that Oster set just because it takes off. The blades are like yay long. Not that really, I don't know if that helps anybody, but it just takes off more. We have the little A5 set, and we have the small green set that I cannot for the life of me remember what kind they are. But all the show suppliers carry them. We keep our clipper blades. We keep clipper oil. One thing that we discovered especially with that Oster set, do not use clipper lube on them. The clipper lube has alcohol in it, and the Oster set has a little plastic piece in it that helps turn or move the blade. Well, the oil was drying out because we were ruining blades after blades after blades, and we couldn't figure out why. Things weren't cutting. We took it to our clipper blot guy, and he said the alcohol in that clipper lube, which clipper lube is to keep your blades, or cool lube, is to keep your blades cool. But the alcohol in that was drying out that plastic piece. And so over time, those blades were wearing out the plastic piece. That's why it wasn't cutting. So be very aware of that. It is a good idea to sanitize your clippers and your blades, especially if you go cut somebody else's stuff. But that is something to be aware of. Take your clippers apart and see what parts they have. If they have plastic in them, don't use the cool lube. We used a paintbrush a lot to clean the blades out. We always tried to leave our tools in the best condition that we possibly could. We used to get in trouble if we didn't clean our blades out. We have hoof trimmers in our box. We started out with a set of hoof trimmers that looked like garden shears. They had really pointy blades on them. We have since moved away from those. We found a set on Premier, one, which is it's a website for sheep and goats, and it has a serrated blade on it and a dull tip, so that, I don't know how many of you have clipped goat hooves before, but goats don't like their hooves clipped, and they tend to kick. And the sharp set, Mom and I both have scars on our hands from a goat kicking and us sending a blade through our hands. I would recommend the serrated set for everybody. They're pretty safe for kids to use, but also we felt like they cut better and they held their edge better. We keep shampoo, waterless and traditional. The waterless, that bled over from the horse side of things. It's a spot remover. A lot of the show supplies industries have them now. It never fails. You wash your goat, you put it back in the pen, you bring it back out, and it's got a spot of poop on it. It never fails. Goats are just like that. It's like they're little poop magnets. We kept the waterless for touch-ups. Traditional shampoo, we use a White and Bright. We use, I can't remember the brand, but Weaver's got one and Sullivan's both got one. There's also, you can get them at the feed store too. We've learned, and we haven't tried the Sullivan stuff in a while, but Sullivan's in the beginning would turn the goats blue if you left it on too long. I think they've probably worked that out since, 2011. But you do have to get that stuff out of them pretty quickly. You can use a coconut shampoo. You can use any other shampoo. I just recommend the White and Bright because it really helps them be white. Conditioning spray. We use the conditioning spray. We used to use Shoshin, which is, again, is another horse thing. But Shoshin's oily. And so if you were outside at a jackpot and the wind blew, your goat became brown. Or you'd get it all over your hands and it was just gross. So we went to this conditioning spray, which is a Weaver product. Not that I'm Weaver, Sullivan. Sullivan's has got something similar. It's just called something different. And it foams, and we would put it on, wipe it down their backs and all over them, just so they were shiny and they were pretty, and they smelled good. And it's not as icky on the kids' hands from them touching, or a judge's hands, because there's nothing more annoying than touching a goat and it being greasy. And then we keep baby wipes in our, they come in handy for a lot of different things. Mom typically uses them to wipe boogers out of goats' noses instead of the end of her shirt. Any of you moms out there, you know how that goes. We do keep, for the doe kids, we keep a hoof liniment in our box that we use to make the doe's horns pretty, and we'll use the baby wipes to wipe it back off. We also, the baby wipes come in handy for all kinds of different things. So, all right. So when we're clipping our market goats are typically body shorn. We should not see any hair, long hair, above their knees and above their hocks. So everything above there should be clipped off. Now don't go clipping their tail and giving them a rat tail, but everything else should be clipped off. Some people will clip their heads, some people won't. That's kind of personal preference. I think we started doing that when my brother was still showing. My brother is younger than I am, so it was a later in our show career thing. But I don't remember clipping heads on anything. Now I think it's a little more common practice, but again, personal preference. If you've got an animal that has a really dished face or has a really prominent Roman nose, you may want to clip their heads, you may not. It's up to you. Like I said a little bit ago, we typically cover coat them a couple of days, 3 to 4, maybe as much as 5. We would cover coat blade them, and the only thing that difference between cover coat and fine cover coat leaves their hair a little bit longer, whereas a fine blade is going to take their hair down quite a bit. If you guys have never clipped goats before, goats have spotty skin, mottled skin. You do want to be very, very careful if you clip them with a fine blade. Do not use a surgical blade. There was a kid that did that one year and their goat was pink because they pretty much clipped all of the hair off of them, which is not good. But if you use a fine blade and then turn them out into their pen in the sunshine in the summer, make sure you put some sunscreen on them because they're just like pigs. They will sunburn. And there's nothing worse than a sunburned goat because they're just uncomfortable and there's nothing you can do for them, unfortunately. Do not clip a goat the night before the show. You will have clipper marks all over them. No matter what kind of blade you use, you will still have clipper marks. You can do touch-ups before the night before the show or the day of the show, but don't try to clip them the day of the show or the night before. So where's my little mouse? We want everything above his knees. This is a buck, so this is a little different, but we want everything above his knees and above his hocks to come off. All of this, when we go to trim his tail, we want to go ahead and trim it until, I don't know if you guys can see the end, kind of where it still looks like a paintbrush. We still want them to kind of have a paintbrush on the end of their tail. It used to be you would leave a lot of that hair. Now you kind of make it just look nice, whatever nice looks, because it's just like us. My hair grows different than Kenzie's does. So it may look different on different animals, but you do want to leave a little bit of this paintbrush. Like I said, some people shave their wethers heads down. Some people don't. Personal preference, in all honesty. All right, so clipping hooves. Like I said, this is kind of a hard, delicate process. It's just like clipping your guys' fingernails. You don't want to cut them down to the quick. You kiddos that have had mom clip your fingernails and she's gotten a little close and it hurts. Same thing for the goats. The other thing that we keep in our clipper box, this is what I was gonna remember. The other thing that we keep in our clipper box is baking soda. Baking soda makes a great blood stopper. I don't know how many animals have kicked. We've cut them too short and they bleed. Put a little baking soda on there and just hold it and kind of pack it. And yes, they will be sore for a little bit. So don't try to trim their hooves the day before the show. But their hooves grow back pretty quickly. So that will heal pretty quickly. Like I said, we prefer, Premier or Nasco. Either of them are sheep and goat manufacturers, but we prefer the serrated edged ones just because they are less likely to jab your hands if something does kick. We trim the sidewalls flush, and I have a picture. So we trim the sidewalls flush. being careful to not cut down into that quick. And you'll be able to see on an animal, you'll see the blood get closer. You'll see the color change in their hoof. That's when you know that you're starting to get too close. So the way I was taught was to just take a little bit at a time. The nice thing about market animals, their hooves are still relatively soft. Whereas, like I said, our big stinky bucks, their hooves get really hard and they grow out really quickly. And they're a lot harder to manage. But you guys ideally are going to have your animals 90, 120, maybe 160 days. They're not going to, their hooves are not going to grow out that quickly. Or not get hard that quickly, I guess. And then this is the part where you need to pay attention to your animal structure. Some animals need a little bit, we always took a little bit of the pad off. So I'll go to this picture. We always took a little bit of this off back here, this pad. But some animals need more than others. Some animals need more of their inside sidewall cut. Some animals need more of the outside sidewall cut. It depends on how your animals stand on their feet. Just like you guys have inserts in your shoes, and sometimes you have to have your inserts chopped to where it will help you stand correctly. I know mine, I have a little thing that lifts my insert up on one side so that my leg is straight. Because apparently I'm a bow-legged old cowboy, I don't know. But this might be something that you see when you start out. I would come in here right where this, and you just have to kind of figure it out. I would come in here right where this split is and work my clippers under there to this edge, and then I would trim all of that off, all in one swipe. I wouldn't go very deep down their foot, but I would trim all of that off, and then I would turn it around and come back and trim this inside, and then go back to, I would trim this flag on, which this picture is not a fantastic picture, but I would trim this flag off on their heel, and then I would go back and touch things up. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense. But ideally, this is what you want their hoof to look like in the end. You still have quite a bit of white color in here. When it starts to get kind of purple or cherry colored, that's when you know that you're getting too close to the quick. And it happens, kiddos. It happens. You cut them too short. It happens. I don't know how many I've done, but like I said, baking soda on that cut, and feel bad for them and love them, and maybe an extra scoop of grain, but then turn them out and they'll be fine in a couple of days. All right, I'm done, Kenzie. That's all I got.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go back up here. There's a couple questions. So there'll be a tad, I'm going to go in chronological order, I guess I should say. So let's see, there was one back on handling, and the question is, how do you get your goat to walk even if you have someone walk behind the goat and it still will not walk?
Okay, so like I said, we found that if you push more than you drag, that helps. Try a different kind of lead on them. If you're working with a flat lead, try a prong collar, see what happens. Some animal, or we had a doe that hated the prong collars and did better on a flat lead. It's okay to change it up. Be sure to check your rules, but change your lead, see if that helps. Try the push method. You kids are going to get really strong depending on what your dominant arm is. Your left arm or your right arm is going to be very strong from showing your goat. But the push at the shoulder really seemed to work for me. Try really hard, kids, not to pull on their tails. You can pinch their tail head, and that looks a little bit better to a judge than just yanking on their tails. But yanking on their tails pretty quickly shows a judge that you haven't worked with them. So try really hard not to do that. Some people will slap their opposite leg. That's personal preference. Sometimes it gets annoying in my mind, but if that's how your animal works, that's how your animal works. Some judges will like it and some judges won't. So I guess just be aware of that.
All right, awesome. So the next question on the list is, so you were talking about your blades that I'm assuming, Michaela, this was in reference to the blade lube and the clipper lube. I think they were wondering what you did use, if there's something you could use that wasn't going to ruin the clippers but could continue to lube it.
Okay, so typically your clippers will come with a bottle of oil, and it's clipper oil. You can also go get it at most suppliers of show supplies, whether that be the feed store, Weaver, Sullivan's, whatever. Most of them have clipper oil. Clipper oil is just fine. It's just the alcohol in the cool lube chews up any plastic parts that are moving plastic parts in a clipper. So we always oil our clippers every time we use them. That's just good practice. And then we do try to disinfect them, but when we disinfect them, we pull them completely apart, pull all the pieces apart, disinfect everything, and leave it out to dry. Don't try to disinfect while you're doing stuff. And I believe Oster makes I think it's an Oster product that's a disinfectant. Otherwise you can disinfect it just like you would anything in your house. Just make sure you pull it all apart and lay it out to dry.
Great, thank you. The next one is, this is a good one. Do we have to wash our goat before we clip them?
It's a good idea. It will make especially on your first trying to get all of that winter hair off. Goats have what's called cashmere. Some goats do, some goats don't, but they have this really fuzzy under hair. And like I said, goats like to rub on the hay, they itch on everything. And so all of that gets down in their hair. And so it makes it a lot harder for your clippers to go through. It's a good idea to wash before you clip. Sometimes it doesn't happen. I'll be honest. Sometimes it doesn't. Your clip job is not going to look as good. I'll let you know that. It's just like trying to cut your own hair. If it's dirty, the barber is not going to have as easy of a time.
Okay, great. And then somebody was saying, where's a good way they can learn how to clip the goat hooves? Do you recommend like YouTube videos or something like that, or talking to a vet?
I don't know if there's any. I've never looked for YouTube videos. When I started, we got lucky and we had a producer that showed us how to do it. So we had, and that would probably be my first option, would be to seek somebody out that knows how to do it. And have them come out to your place and show you how to do it, and help you practice. Like I said, practice on those animals way before fair time. That includes hoof trimming, clipping, working with them, bracing, all of that stuff. Do that all at the beginning, like this time of year. Now that it's started to get warm, it's light outside, you can go out and do that. Kids, I would not, unless you're an older kid, you younger kids, I definitely would take a parent or an older sibling outside with you. It's hard to clip goat hooves by yourselves. That was the other thing I was going to tell you guys. When you're clipping hooves, and if you have to clip them by yourselves, back hooves are very difficult. Goats don't want to hold their hooves still. What I used to do is I would stand over their back and I would straddle them and squeeze. Not hard, just squeeze my legs right behind their hips in their loin area. And typically I got to the point where I was fast enough I could get it done pretty quickly, so they didn't have to hold their hand or their leg up for a long period of time. But squeezing their muscle that goes through their leg and connects in their stifle joint, it constricts all of that, so it doesn't allow them to kick as easily. So if you have to clip them by yourself, that's a good option. If you're going to get into it and do it for a long period of time, turntables are not a bad option. Seidel's, and there's a couple of other manufacturers sell them. Those aren't bad options either. But for you guys' market goats, you shouldn't need a turntable. They're small enough you can kind of manhandle them.
All right. Would sheep clippers work for clipping goats?
So it depends on the clippers. Like I said, we started out with a set of big wool clippers, very pointy blades. They don't work on goats. Goats are much jumpier. They are much antsier. Their hide is much thinner too, so we ended up cutting them a lot. Plus, those great big wool clippers get hot very quickly. So I would tell you no if they've got really super pointy, sharp blades. If they're more of a finishing clipper that you might use once all of that heavy wool is knocked off, and they've got short blades that are a little more dull, you might be able to get away with those. But like I said, an Oster brand is what we used. You can get on Premier. Premier One is where we get a lot of our supplies that's specific to sheep and goats. And they have all kinds of clipper options. Valley Vet Supply, that's another one that has all kinds of different clipper options. So those would be two places that I might go look for them.
Okay, great. And then we do have a couple people asking about hot shots, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, but we never support the use of hot shots in training animals to brace. It can backfire on them and it's not ethical. So I'll let you speak to that, Megan.
Yep, Kenzie's right. Not ethical at all. If you wouldn't like it done to you, don't do it to your animals. The other thing about a hot shot, just like in cattle, they have proven that hot shots have damaged the meat. And like I talked about with the Cool Lube or the Cool Blue, that damaged meat becomes lost product. And we're getting to a point in our industry where packing houses are not wanting to take 4-H animals because of all of the lost product for one form or fashion. So no, don't use a hot shot on them. There's all kinds of different things that people don't use. Hot electric fence. I've heard people use tasers. Don't do it. It's not okay.
All right, so you touched on goat collars a little bit. This person's asking what goat collar should be used in the show. So
it depends on your show, and it depends on your preference. When I was growing up, prong collars weren't a thing. A lot of people use the big, heavy, white, almost like garden chain or like what you would see strung between things. I used just a flat dog chain is what I used when I was still showing. Some people prefer the prong collars. Like I said, a goat will choke themselves out much faster on a flat collar than they will on a prong collar, just because that prong collar, it's pokey. They're going to get off of it. So it's up to you. But also, again, check your show rules. We had a couple of people show up to Denver last year that they had not checked the rules, trained their animals on a prong collar, and they couldn't use it. Some places have gone to the Hummel halters. But again, check your rules. It's up to you. It's up to what your animal works best with, and it's up to what your preference is.
Great. There is a question on basically the goat racks and what's the benefit of shearing or clipping on a goat rack versus having them just flat on the ground.
Control more than anything. It's very frustrating to try to chase them around on the ground. No matter how much you snub them up to the fence, they're still going to dance around. Whereas a rack, because they're up in the air, if they go to dance away from you and they go to step off that edge, some of them will hang themselves. I will be honest with you. So don't leave something on a high rack and walk away from them. If you're going to, like I talked about, tie them up and make them stand, make sure they're just in a head catch on the ground. You can buy head catches for the fence. You can just zip tie a head catch to the fence. You can buy the stand like what I talked about. But as far as a clipping stand, it's control more than anything because their heads are up. They can't really dance away from you. They can, but when they go to step off that edge, they're going to come right back. But don't ever walk away from them while they're on the stand. We had some family friends of ours. They walked out of the barn. The dog was barking at something. He walked out of the barn to see what the dog was barking at, and the goat had pulled the stand over on top of himself and broke his neck. So don't ever do that. Don't ever walk away from them.
All right, let's see here. I gotta catch back up to where I was at. I'm gonna skip any of the nutrition questions since you can go over that next week. So make sure if you guys are able to hop on next week, you ask those questions. Common question, how often should they be bathing their goats?
Okay, so what I was taught as a kid, just like some of you ladies may not wash your hair every day because the soap actually pulls the natural oils out of their skin. We would wash them every time we would clip them. And because I was jackpotting all summer long when I was a kid, that was every week to every 2 weeks. If you're not going to jackpot all summer long, I would recommend washing them once a month, just to make sure, more than anything, you're checking them for ailments, you're checking them for any sort of little parasites. If you find that they're itching on stuff more than they usually do, give them a bath, because they may have, goats are really prone to getting mites. And mites are these little biting creatures that bite their skin and they itch. So if you give them a bath, I forget, there's a big, starts with a C. My mom used to use it. It's for cattle. It comes in a great big jug. And when we found one that had, it's a disinfecting soap. That's what we would wash them. I think it's called oddly enough, COVID, I think is what it's called. It comes in a great big jug, red lettering. But that would be something, if they get to itching a lot, you can disinfect them and hopefully get rid of those little bugs.
All right, awesome. We have a ton of questions coming in. So I'm going to say maybe if you're willing to, Megan, give us another 5 minutes or so of your time and we can try to get some of them answered. Somebody's got a question here about bracing during the show. They've found in recent years some of the most experienced kids who jackpot brace their wethers the moment they set up and stay that way the whole time. These members here had always assumed you only braced when the judge came around the backside of the animal.
So yes, industry standard has now gone to pretty much everybody just stays braced the whole time. That's why I said it's just as much of a workout for you guys as it is for the animal. But yes, industry standard has pretty much gone to you just stay stuck the whole time. Partly because, especially in a smaller show, you never know when a judge is looking. And you want that animal looking the best you possibly can at all times. It's okay, kids, to step away from them for a second and give yourself a break, give them a break, but get right back and stick them again. Because again, a judge is always surveying, always. And if for a half a second you let off that brace, he looks at it, you may lose a couple places in a class. So my recommendation would be working at bracing them and working at bracing them for long periods of time. Like I said, some classes last 20, 30, 40 minutes. So you and the animal are going to have to be used to that. So I would start out with work on bracing them, see if you can get them up to a minute, brace them for a full minute, then move to 5 minutes, then move to 10 minutes, in increments. Don't jump in and try to make them brace for 40 minutes right off the bat. Start them slow, mostly because you're going to get just as tired as they are, and then move up.
All right, great. So there's a question on here. Alaska, you were asking about how long the horns can be. I'm just going to say that once again, you need to check your show standards and stuff. I know we in Adams County, we allow horns on market animals, but they have to be tipped or taped. And I believe every show might be different. Is that correct, Megan?
Yep.
Okay.
Just check your show standards.
And then the next question is regarding thickness of the hair on the legs. They're wondering if there's something you can do to thicken that leg hair, whether trimming it early off, trimming it off early can make it grow back thicker.
So no, don't trim it. Don't knock it all off. First things first, because it will take it forever to come back. It's just like cattle and like the lambs. You have to work it. There is Stock Show Boutique, which just sounds goofy. They're big lamb people. And a while back, she did a really good blog post on how they work their lamb's hair, which their lambs have a lot of shag on their hair. You don't want, those great big bell boot looking things on a goat. They just they're not going to grow that. But the same rules apply. How they work their lamb's hair can work for your goats. The other thing, it depends on your show. Some shows will allow you to put product into their hair, and some shows will not. State Fair will allow you to put anything that's not, you can put it in adhesive. It has to be washed out before it gets on the truck. You can put an adhesive in their hair, but you cannot put anything that changes the color of their hair. And Denver won't allow you to put anything in their hair. So that's another thing. Check your show. The other thing is talk to people in the industry. Talk to people who are good showmen and have been doing it a long time and are good at working hair and that kind of thing. Talk to them and see what their secrets are. Very few people, they may not give you a whole truth, but very few people will turn your question down.
We will say thank you very much, Megan. We really appreciate your time again. And then next week, we're at the same on a Tuesday again at 5 o'clock, and Megan will be presenting on market goat nutrition. So if you guys have questions and stuff, start thinking about that. But if everybody could give Megan a big, huge thank you for being here for us today and putting this on, we really appreciate you sharing your expertise.